All right, we are getting to the top 20 albums of August in a timely manner this month, and I suppose this was a pretty good month overall. There was at least 10 albums that I felt really strong about, and about 10 more that I felt were pretty good and worth recommending. And yeah, no real notes about August. I was sick for most of it, so it was kind of like a shit ass month in general. Played a couple of good video games, read a few books. That's as much as you could ask for. So number one, the first one, a little bit of a surprise at sort of the end of the month was Urfaust's Untergang, and this is an atmospheric black metal band who've often been accused of being a black doom metal band, and this is one of their strongest offerings in terms of looking back to some more cumulative ideas while retaining a lot of the things they learned on their sort of fifth and sixth record. This seventh record definitely leans back into a lot of what their third record had done. It retains the general signature of the band and the interesting vocals and the use of synthesizers and heavier, sort of ritualistic black metal pieces, and comes together with a record that is representative of them. It's a great one to go out on. They went out on top, and I just found myself completely transfixed with it for at least 3 or 4 weeks, and felt like it deserved the number one spot for just being a great swan song for a band that I've enjoyed for a good decade at least. So definitely check that one out this month if you check anything out. So Ontological Mysterium is a weird one. Number two is this latest record for Horrendous, and it's not necessarily a step outside of their skin, but maybe a step into it a little bit more as they take the more dramatic structure of Idol of several years ago, and now create this inherently progressive sort of tunnel of horrors here with Ontological Mysterium. It's a ton of ideas packed into a couple of very impactful songs, a lot of interesting interstitial or jammed moments in feeling, and yeah, it sort of has this step in and out of consciousness that it does throughout. That is, surely it's packed with ideas, and a lot. Some of them are almost kind of boilerplate, and some of them are very much their signature otherwise. And then there's still that progressive death thrash metal feeling to a lot of their rhythms that stands up to a lot of their newer ideas quite strongly. So not as much of an involved and impressive release as Icon was, and the score will reflect that in general, but still a very good record for her from Horrendous, a band that sort of stepped away from their Swedish death metal sort of beginnings to something that is now I would say their own. This is more of a reach for a signature, and as much as it seems like a mashup, give it a few more listens, and you might find yourself understanding the structure of this thing as sensical and full of ideas, full of just scatterbrained ideas. So uh, definitely something you need to hear at least. I think the major success of Scepter Vision Master's debut record. This is a Washington-based heavy metal band from a duo, and the major success of this record is basically that it achieves such a strong narrative and such an interesting style, which is its own, that it feels like they were ready to go from the start. They were very prepared with this record, and it seems like they finessed it in such a way where it feels like a very substantial and engaging heavy metal record, one that has elements of speed metal and all manner of heavy rock and punk in there too. So they definitely keep it interesting in a way that you just don't find outside of certain like slew Peg records and things like that, where there's something very nerdy about it, but just really convincing in its overall presentation of its storyline and its ideas and its yeah, just a knack for this kind of thing. So I got a kick out of it. I was very surprised that it was as accomplished as it was, and they had worked on it so much. So I had to give it to this one, and yeah, definitely probably the highest recommendation of heavy metal this year so far, outside of one or two outliers. So. From the Bowels of the Earth is the debut album from German death metal band Hallucinate. And this is what I would consider an atmospheric death metal band, and one that has sort of a psychedelic rock influenced sound. Definitely something from the birth from the style that Morbus Kron sort of introduced with Sweben and other bands in that ilk, where there's still a very strong foundation of thrashing, kind of classic death metal at its root. There's a little bit of like a doomed feeling in there, but it's a psychedelic death metal album. It's very influenced by psychedelic rock and progressive rock in the way that it plays with rhythm, and the general tonality of it is very different than a lot of what you'll hear these days. Now, this is a death metal record. It doesn't focus on post-metal the way that other bands in this style sometimes do. So if you're a fan of like Cadaveric Fumes' kind of swan song record, definitely check this one out too, because I feel like it's close to on par with that release. Sculpting from Time is the second full-length album from Aspadillas. This is a Finnish, I guess, gothic death doom metal band, which is not quite related to the Peace Bill 3, but more so to the sound of early Catatonia. And, any adjacent groups that sort of leaned into a bit of a gothic rock influence or post-punk influences as they moved away from death metal and black metal and whatnot. So their earlier records had a little bit more of a Verathron-esque or a Hellenic black metal touch to it. This record leans much more into the gothic doom metal side of it, and from early Catatonia to Tiamat to that kind of style, those were kind of the most influential bands at the time. Of course, there's many outliers that you could reference here. A great band. It's a great old school style and a really interesting take for the group. I think the real reason to listen to this album aren't those stylistic notes. It's that it is a memorable and kind of emotional record. So that's the main reason to check it out. If the world goes, then I will run through the way. If the time stops, with the past I Distortions is the second full-length album from Godthrim, and they move away from the epic heavy metal influenced sort of doom metal sound towards something that is much more clearly an epic kind of gothic doom metal mixture. And that still does include a little bit of kind of modern sludge ideas on the second half, and there's a couple of kind of throwaway moments on this record, but overall it's very strong, and one that is really powerful on its first half and leans into some new ideas on the second half. So they're really pushing forward. They had enough time to really think about what they wanted to do with this project, and it led to a very different second release. For my taste, it is both very classic and maybe a little bit too different from what they were doing on the last record. But I can't deny that their songwriting improved, and that this space that they've given themselves to breathe has led to just more memorable and affecting emotional pieces. So this is it's a big change, but it's a good change. And if you like that previous style, they still explored it pretty well on their first EP and their first LP. So check out this one. It's something a little bit more connective. So Palace of Shadows is the debut full-length from Cystic. This is a Seattle, Washington-based death metal band, and one where these guys were all over the place. They played a bit of crossover, death metal, all these things in the past, and when Cystic formed, they sort of honed in on what they wanted to do, which was old school death metal with a little bit of a different kick to it. There's a little bit more doom on this record. There's than past releases. There's a little bit more of a decided upon serious sound, which is just I think better overall. There's this interesting kind of honest shambling real old school death metal feeling to it, which also it relates to new and old death metal, and I think that's it's a pretty strong showing. It's a very atmospheric record that was surprising. It just they didn't seem like that serious of a band, and then this record kind of hit, and it's just it's strong overall. It's very unique sound design. The drummer is a little bit different in the way he approaches these songs, and yeah, it's if you like Mortiferum or bands in that ilk, this will be a great thing to grab. The Banishing is a traditional doom metal band out of Italy featuring members of Assumption and Messa, and if you know those bands, you can expect nothing but quality from these folks who are really coming into their own on this second album in terms of exploring traditional doom metal that is both influenced by epic heavy metal and maybe early power metal, but also very squarely ventures into the realm of like Saint Vitus and especially Pentagram. So if you're a fan of like early 70s and early or late 70s and early 80s traditional doom metal and how that formed between just a small group of bands, you'll really get the sense that this is something along those lines, and something that maybe touches upon Paul Chain a little bit, maybe touches a little bit on Candlemass, but reaches into other directions for this very somber, serious, but inspired doom metal record. But I think a lot of people overlook this. Maybe it looks a bit plain or whatever, but there's a lot of substance to this record, and I really, it's an enthusiastic recommendation to fans of traditional doom metal.
That nothing's real.
Lux Mort is the debut full-length album from Reverence to Paroxysm. This is a Mexico City-based band, and they've got guys in here who've been around for a long time. They've proven themselves in a lot of great records and record labels with a bunch of great bands. And if you're a fan of Hakovitz and you want to hear what some of those guys can do with something a little bit more atmospheric, doomed, maybe Incantation or Disma-esque, this is the record to do it. It's a great sounding, kind of over-the-top, aggressive, very underground death metal record with a ton of atmosphere, and is mournful and very loud and kind of blown out in the way that like Ripakulu was, but has movement that's maybe more close to like Crips at times. There's a lot to like on this record. I think a lot of people just aren't talking about it enough, and I think this is a very strong recommendation for me. I think you should check it out. So 13 albums in, and Incantation is still great. I think that Unholy Deification is better than the last record, that's for sure. But that record wasn't that bad either. I like the sort of thrashing style is still part of what Incantation do. I think that they're still capable of brutal and kind of doom feeling moments, and overall this record impressed me, especially when I was in the depth of like the fourth or fifth concurrent listen. Really getting into this record, you start to get a sense for not only its timbre and its sense of movement, but the use of repetition starts to make more sense once you kind of locked into the voice of the record. And for me, I really just liked the way that John McEntie's vocals sounded on this record. There's some really heavier, doomed moments that just they hit better than a lot of their stuff has hit since maybe 2014 or so. So it was great to kind of get lock back into what Incantation do and get into a record from these guys. It's been about 10 years since I really connected with one of their records. So see if it works out for you. So I think approaching the Silent Future, this is a collaborative album from psychedelic doom metal band or doom rock band Resin and Mexico City based kind of drone doom group Venom Sabbathi, however you pronounce that. I really began to appreciate Resin's discography a lot more as I approached this record and I found a lot of the things that I liked about this record I hadn't heard as clearly when I reviewed Solace earlier this year. I found that I liked this record a lot. It's a great album, but I also found myself enjoying Solace even more. So if you kind of got into that record but didn't quite get it, maybe this unlocks some part of my brain that just enjoyed the atmosphere the group put forth and the unique vocals and all that. So anyway, this is kind of an accessible but also kind of out there psychedelic doom metal record, which is at once a little bit heavier than parts of Solace, but also a little bit more out there. It spaces out a bit more thanks to the contributions of Venom Sabbathi, who use samples or spoken sections to sort of narrate this conceptual record. It's a cool thing, and it's well worth picking up to sort of dig into if you're a nerd for that kind of thing. So the fifth full-length album from Runespell, Shores of Nastron. I think I said Nastron right when I in the actual video review. So check that out if you want to know how to pronounce that. But this is a black metal band from Australia, an atmospheric and sometimes melodic one, which takes a lot of influence from Polish and sort of classic black metal of a certain type to basically just create these increasingly cinematic pieces. And as their discographies moved along and they've tried different things, I think they've reached this point where the cinema of these scenes is more and more apparent, and the knack of the band and the style that they really approach with their lead guitar work paints a bigger picture each time. So this is maybe less of a focus on riffs and aggression and more a focus on setting a scene, and a big one at that. So maybe a little bit different of a record than I would have expected as a follow-up to the last one, but a logical progression once I'd thought about it. I really enjoyed this record. Ion is the latest full-length album from Bees Made Honey in the Vein Tree, and this is a German collective of people. This is their third record, and is probably both the heaviest and maybe the most atmospheric and extended. It's quite a long record, but also one that achieves its theme most completely. And I think immersion is really the big note for this record. The immersion of the quite extended listening experience does touch upon kind of a post-metal meets psychedelic rock fusion, but it does find a way to get heavy. It does find a way to completely step outside of its zone and create a very engrossing experience. And I think it's worth experiencing if you've got some interest in psychedelic rock and where that touches upon both doom metal and post metal, and how those things can fuse in interesting ways. I think is one of the more polished bands to achieve that, even though there are quite a few that have attempted. So this was worth checking out. So, Death of Sorrow is the second full length album from this band, and the first one came out back in, I think, 1992. So, this is sort of the. I don't know if they've necessarily reformed and are going to tour or anything, but they've basically recorded the album they were writing back in 1993 when they decided to disband after Roadrunner Records dropped them. And they've been pretty faithful to the sound of Sorrow on this thing. Of course, this is a modern production, and they've considered a lot of that, but it is a very well balanced recording that still resembles what Sorrow sound like, and it's a big deal that they came back and recorded this because it was kind of a dead, kind of lost demo that they'd never finished, and now they came back and just re-recorded a lot of these songs quite faithfully because they were mostly completely written back then, and recreated the feeling that Sorrow always brought. And this was kind of an important band for their time, and certainly an underground sort of legend for some people who are interested in death doom. So, if you're a fan of, and really the history of death doom metal, you have to know this band, and you probably should check out this addition to their sort of legacy here because it's very well done.
Resides within your mind.
The Astral Gloom is the second full-length album from The Right, and this is a black doom metal band that naturally fuses the work of Black Oath, a Italian doom metal band with some occult tendencies, and Denial of God, a black heavy metal band who have variously flirted with speed metal and sort of epic heavy metal in their very interesting, unique sound. So we get the vocalist of Denial of God, but members of Black Oath and some other bands contributing to this second record, which is both much a little bit more clean in its production values, but and also a little bit more repetitive in its song structures. So we get an album that feels very devotional and occult and very classic in its feeling in terms of where black metal and doom metal meet. And certainly they treat doom metal seriously here in terms of the songwriting, and that's kind of what appeals to me about this band is like, yeah, we get the feeling of early black metal in some sense, but this is essentially a doom metal record just as well, and a heavy metal record nonetheless. So solid record, well worth listening to, pretty unique sound. Black and Cerebral Riffs is the third full length from Dead End Dripping, and this is a solo project from a fellow who certainly has a knack for brutal death metal, and he showed that on the first two records here. And he was very much in tune with sort of the grotesque, but also kind of early 2000s style of brutal technical death metal, and each of his records have become a little bit more technical with every step, but this record attempts something a little bit more holistic, a little bit more progressive in its movements, and certainly has more of a free-flowing throwback to a lot of older school death metal, whether it's Demolic or whatever else. It feels like a very modern, kind of wild, one-man brutal death metal release, and it has a lot of unique and interesting ideas thrown in here. And I think there's a couple of points where the groove just becomes more important than the attack, and that's fine. That's kind of what death metal does best, is either or. But I wanted some of the more dense and exciting songs up front overtook the excitement of some of the more plain, kind of grooved at pieces that just kind of clunk past later on in the record's running order. So great record. Had a couple of flaws, but it's an exciting death metal record for people who want something that is something that's a little bit more modern, but also unique. Facet is a noise rock and hardcore, post-hardcore trio who certainly work within the confines of modern noise rock and the more polished spectrum of it, and less definitely tied into a more classic sort of early 90s feeling noise rock sound that wasn't fully touched by alternative rock and was more obsessed with motoric rhythms and kind of an aggressive style. If you listen to a band like USA Nails, you'll understand what this group is all about. Prayer Group is also somewhat similar in some ways. So there's um, definitely a sense of catchy songwriting on this record, and also clearly, just look at the artwork. They're attributing Unwound in some ways too. They covered one of their songs on their first release. So this kind of adds to that legacy. I love what they're all about. I love the sound of this record, very well produced, and overall, this is just the kind of stuff I like. This is the kind of noise rock and post-hardcore that I enjoy, which is, it certainly has a lot of anxiety tied to it and a lot of existential dread behind it, but also it's just kind of exciting music to listen to. There's an impassioned rant behind all of it that I really enjoyed, and this record stuck with me personally. So maybe not the kind of thing that everyone who follows these lists enjoys, but I really like this kind of band. So, yeah, again, for the sake of variety, Miss Tridentina, the second, I think, official full length from Of Darkness, was a bit of a surprise as an interesting and unique take on funeral doom metal. And this is from members of Graveyard and some other Spanish death metal or Barcelona area death metal bands. And it's something they've done for a while. It's been kind of quite the underground sort of force to especially look back on. Their demos are really interesting. Their first record was kind of a weird compilation, and this is where we're getting, I think, Of Darkness proper. They've expanded to a trio, and I think this is a very focused, very unique record that has sort of just like an operatic, monastic quality to it that is blasphemous and just avant-garde enough to really fit within what I consider the canon of funeral doom metal proper, and not the conformist type of stuff that we get a lot from funeral doom. So well worth checking out and giving a chance for something different. And we have another Spanish death metal band, or another Spanish band here, but this is a Catalonia-based black thrash metal group who have been around for quite a while. And some of their early work was kind of manic, and this work is just more aggressive and focused, and it's in line with their last three records. Pretty much, you pick up any of the last 3 or 4 records from Korgel the Exterminator, and you're getting riffs, you're getting aggression, you're getting black metal, you're getting thrash metal, and you're getting maybe a little bit of Voivod on this record. But Built to Kill was it's just the kind of record where you just you get hit with all the riffs, and it's a good time. And this is just one of their stronger packages overall. I really like the cover art and the production values and how that all feels very much still an underground kind of thrash metal, black metal, speed metal feeling thing, but also has songs to back it up and has a great album cover and all that. So great record. So I wasn't really what to put here at number 20. And I finally landed upon Colony Drop, and I didn't review this record, but I thought, what, this stood out. It stood out this month as a weird crossover record with an interesting take on thrash metal rhythmic, and one that felt like it was a little bit of a throwback to the sort of 86 breaching like 89 sort of side of thrash metal that was taking on the popularity of crossover and adding some extra musicianship to it, that maybe they were going for more harmonized leads, maybe they were going for longer songs, and they've certainly done better than the second Crumbsuckers record here on Brace for Impact, as this Seattle area band kind of switches it up throughout this record, but overall it delivers a lot more than I would have expected after hearing their earlier material. This was just a memorable and kind of a good reminder that like crossover thrash is more than just power trip clones, and those got boring like fucking 8 years ago. So this is something else, and if you're a fan of crossover, I think you should check it out.
Paraphiliac acceptance, the spreading of ideas. Behold the